Okay, good evening, everyone. By the way, whoever wants to, start put the video on, that would be great. So I see, because I can see who's here. But otherwise, don't worry about it. It's fine. Oh, there we go, Daniel. I can see you. I know we have one. Yeah, but that's fine. Oh, Michael is here. Great. Nancy, shalom. Ira, shalom. Julie, Laurie. Okay. So last week, basically, we discussed. Oh, that's great. I can see you guys. Looks great. So last week we discussed basically how, as Jews, we don't fear death. Tonight, I think the class has done extremely well. I think the topic here is of tremendous interest to a lot of people. So let me start by sharing the screen. Second. Okay. So the screen in front of you, Journey of the Soul, lesson 2. Today we will be discussing these 4 ideas, these 4 concepts which are right in front of you. Number 1, the moment of passing. So what's the spiritual significance of the moment of a person's passing? We'll discuss this at length. Number 2, we'll talk about the process of the soul's departure from the body. As we'll see soon, is it painful, for example, for the soul to leave the body? Section 3 and 4 will examine the Jewish traditions surrounding the care of the body and the deceased and its interment. We'll learn there's a whole process of tara, purification, and why that's so important. And number 4, the issue of visiting graves, grave visitation. We'll see all that soon. Okay, so that's the overview of what we're going to be discussing tonight. Okay, so I have over here, let me just show you, I have the actual textbook. I don't have it as a PDF, so I can't email it like I did last week, but I will show it on the screen. Okay, so, 1 second. No. Okay, here you go. Can you guys see the screen? Let me share it again so you can see it for sure. Okay, here we go. So this is the PDF. This is the book for tonight.
Yes.
Okay, great. So as you see, the topic is taking leave, our evolving relationship with the departed. The departed is death, pain, souls. So this is the actual book which we'll be discussing tonight. So the first thing we need to understand, in order to, is figure 2 is this figure on the left-hand side of here. In order for us to read text number 1a, we first need to understand a basic rule over here. What is the soul comprised of? So the soul, every single one of us, our souls, has 5 parts. Tonight we'll be discussing just 2 of those, but briefly the 5 parts are nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, yechidah. Don't worry about that. What we'll be focusing on tonight is ruach and nefesh. Okay, so there's 2 parts of the soul. One is called ruach and one is called nefesh. Okay, in the figure in front of you, you'll see that the ruach, its function, it enables emotions, and I'm going to explain all this soon, as opposed to the nefesh, which enables physical, biological life. And location after departure, the ruach is in paradise and the nefesh is in the grave. Okay, let me just explain this. Okay, for those who are just logging on now, don't worry, we're here. We're going to explain this, and we're just getting started. Okay, so this has to be clear because the entire lesson is based on these 2 things, ruach and nefesh. Okay, let's go through this text again. So there's 2 parts of the soul. One part is the nefesh. The nefesh part is what enables a person to live. So the nefesh part, if you look at a body without a soul, a lifeless body, the body doesn't have nothing to it. There's nothing in the body. There's no vitality. There's no energy. There's no strength. There's nothing to that body. But once the soul comes in, the nefesh is the one which is enabling the physical, biological life. The ruach is enabling the emotions. What happens is when a person passes away, the nefesh remains with the body in the grave. And the ruach goes to Gan Eden, goes to paradise. Now, in case that sounds gibberish, we're going to bring this down and explain it much, much further. In text number 1a in front of you, we're going to read a letter that the Alter Rebbe, the founder of the Chabad movement, sent to students of a Rebbe called Rabbi Nachum Mendel of Horodok, who had just passed away, and the students were devastated that their Rebbe had been lost, that they thought, oh my God, he's lost, he's gone, we buried him, what's going to be? What are we going to do? So look inside this, the source right over here. Oh, sorry. 1 second, I made it too big. Hold on. Okay, so look inside there, on the right-hand side. So this is the Alter Rebbe's words. As is known, the life of a tzaddik, a righteous person, is not physical but spiritual. It consists of faith, reverence, and love for God. So as we learned last week, what is a tzaddik, a righteous person involved with in this world? He doesn't really care about materialism. He cares more about faith, reverence, and love for God. So during the tzaddik's lifetime on earth, and by the way, soon we'll see that it's not just talking about a tzaddik, it's talking about any person. But for the moment, during the tzaddik's lifetime on earth, these three attributes that belong to the soul dimension of ruach are constrained within the container and garb, namely the nefesh that is bound to the corporeal body. This imposes a restraint of physical space upon these attributes. Let me explain. See, when a person lives, his or her soul is very limited. It's limited by the physical body. The soul can only be present right now in my body. You see my body, my heart, my legs, my hands, my eyes. My soul can only be contained here within this physical body, but it cannot go everywhere because it's limited. As a result, I'm going to continue to read, all the tzaddik's disciples received by the glow of these ruach attributes, a mere ray that is emitted beyond the container by means of the tzaddik's holy words and thoughts. The inability to receive directly from ruach is a revelatory handicap, and therefore our sages stated that it takes 40 years for students to fully plumb the depths of their master's teachings. By contrast, after the tzaddik's passing, the nefesh separates from the ruach and remains in the grave, while the ruach and its three attributes rise to Gan Eden, paradise. Consequently, whoever is close to the tzaddik can receive directly from his ruach in Gan Eden because the ruach is no longer restrained in a container or confined to a physical space. Let me explain. What that means is, after a person passes away, so one part of his soul, don't worry about the terminology, we'll call it nefesh, one part of his soul remains with the body in the grave. But the other part of the soul, the ruach, goes and rises above and goes to paradise. And therefore, if you want to bond with the righteous person, you can bond with this person and you are not limited in any way, shape, or form. And that's why he says there's now a straightforward path for the tzaddik's disciples to connect with the essence of their master's ruach, the faith, awe, and love with which the tzaddik served God. And not merely these attributes glow that escape beyond the container, the disciples connect and receive commensurate to the degree of their loving connection close to the tzaddik during his lifetime and after his death. For the transmission of all things spiritual is always by means of great love. And I'm going to explain this even further now. Okay? Let me give a parable to explain this. Okay, so let's say you have a child who needs to learn mathematics. Want to learn maths. So I bring two apples, right? I bring two masks, right? I bring two masks in front of me and put this in front of the child. And I say 2 plus 2 equals 4. So the young child has to now understand this abstract idea with these apples or masks. 2 plus 2 equals 4. But now, what happens when the child has grasped and mastered the concept, the idea that 2 plus 2 equals 4? Do you still need the physical apples as the child becomes an adult, as the child becomes much, much older? When the child is young, is 2 or 5 years old, first learning the concept, and you take him away from the room with the apples, 2 plus 2 apples, he won't understand anymore. What do you mean? What's 2 plus 2? I don't see apples anymore. But when he grows up and matures, the apples are no longer needed. Not only that, the apples may even be a limitation. In other words, the idea of 2 plus 2 equals 4 had a home with the apples, but the idea doesn't need that home. So when a soul is in a body, it's limited, right? Take Philip Silverman. Philip Silverman is a great guy, but Philip Silverman has a soul. Your soul inhabits your body. But when Mr. X passes away, his soul is no longer limited by the physical body. His soul is in paradise. There's a part of the soul that's still with the body in the grave, but the actual soul, the ruach, is not limited in any way, shape, or form. And this idea will give light, shed light on a lot of concepts here tonight associated with death and grave visiting, etc., etc. But for our purposes, it's important to note that there's two parts. Let's go back. To the screen. Okay, so here's what we learned. There's a nefesh, which is the physical life, remains in the grave with the body, and the ruach, which is the emotion, ascends to Gan Eden. For our purposes, don't worry about the terminology. There's one part of the soul called nefesh, one part called ruach. The nefesh remains with the body after a person passes away, as opposed to the ruach, which goes to paradise. Okay, so a tzaddik's life, when he dies, when he passes away, it's limited to expression through the nefesh. When he passes away, the ruach is unleashed, as we learnt. And now, let's just show you this video. Okay, here's a video coming up about this idea.
How many passes does the team in white make? Go! The answer is 13. But did you see the moonwalking bear? That's what psychologists call inattentional blindness. And no, it is not a condition to be concerned about. In fact, life would be impossible without it. Let me explain. As powerful as the human brain may be, it is easily overwhelmed by the sheer onslaught of observation, calculation, sight, sound, and signals that envelop our every waking hour. The brain cannot permit itself to register and record each image and movement, every message and stimulation. Instead, our brains and nervous systems aggressively filter and limit our intake to manageable levels. The result? We notice a fraction and ignore the fullness and remember far less. Often, we purposely engage in what cognitive neuroscientists call selective attention, like focusing on a dinner partner in a crowded restaurant, while tuning out all other conversations in the room. Now imagine that you had the ability to absorb everything around you, to absorb, comprehend, and recall all the details, and fetch every memory at will, without being overwhelmed. That is the incredible experience of the human soul, once it detaches from the body at the close of a lifetime. Unshackled from the frailties of a nervous system, unrestricted by networks of neurons. It is unbelievably free and powerfully present. It is free to absorb truths that mortal minds cannot contain, present to delight in the divine radiance that courses through the cosmos, to bask in divine understanding that supersedes human senses, but is savored by the newly liberated soul.
Okay, that is a very, very, very deep concept. I'm gonna go back to where we are over here. Okay. Okay, so just, I mean, that video was a powerful video, meaning when a person passes away, he or she is no longer shackled by the body. The body shackles us. The body means my soul right now is in my eyes, is in my nose, is in my body. It's shackled. Imagine you have a person in prison. The soul's in prison in my body right now. But when a person passes away, his or her soul is unlimited. It's in exactly the way you saw that video. But let's read the source, the next text in front of us, right over here. Okay, so text number 1b. This is from the Rebbe. It is also a matter of common sense that whatever the direct cause of the separation of the soul from the body, whether a fatal accident, God forbid, or fatal illness, etc., it could affect only any of the vital organs of the physical body, but could in no way affect the spiritual soul. When a person passes away, it's traumatic, it's terrible, terrible, but the soul is not affected by it. A further point, which is also understandable, is that during the soul's lifetime on earth, in partnership with the body, the soul is necessarily handicapped in certain respects by the requirements of the body, such as eating and drinking, right? A person needs physical exercise, he needs to sleep. Even a tzaddik whose entire life is consecrated to Hashem, God, cannot escape the restraints of life in a material and physical environment. Consequently, when the time comes for the soul to return home, it is essentially a release for it as it makes its ascent to a higher world, no longer restrained by a physical body and a physical environment. Henceforth, the soul is free to enjoy the spiritual bliss of being near to God in the fullest measure. By the way, based on this, and this is something we really need to discuss, and we will, it seems that to suggest that maybe death is a wonderful thing. The soul is finally liberated. So we should be happy. We shouldn't be sad. We shouldn't cry. We shouldn't mourn. Right? The soul is liberated, is no longer confined to a physical body. I'm toggling back and forth here with the screen. Right. So the death is essential. Lifetime is limited. We're limited here on this earth. Okay. Now we're going to talk about our relationship with the deceased based on what we are learning here. Okay. So here we go. Look at the screen in front of you. So look at page 46 in front of you. There's no question that for the person's relatives who he or she left here on earth, death is a terrible thing. It's finality, it's loss, it's no longer being with my loved one. It's totally crushing. But what about for the soul itself? It seems to imply what we learned so far, that for the soul, it's actually liberating and it's actually a happy time. And we'll see in a second that it's actually not true at all. The next source, text number 2 in front of you, is from the Zohar, from the Zohar itself, from Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. And he says the exact opposite, that it's actually a very terrible time. Look at the source. It says like this: nothing is as hard for the soul as its separation from the body. Why is that? Why is the soul unhappy at being liberated? Why is the soul unhappy at being liberated from the body? Why? By the way, the reason why we say Kaddish on the yard side, we elevate the soul. The soul is elevated; it goes higher and higher every year on the person's yard side. Okay, so let's see why it's a terribly difficult time. There are 3 reasons. Look at this figure 2.2 in front of you. Reason number 1. Reason number 1 is because all transitions, even necessary and positive ones, are hard. When you change, some people don't like change. You have to move houses, right? Or there's COVID-19 and you have to stuck at home. It's just a change. Even if it's a great, wonderful transition, you still have to move to a bigger house, or you're buying a new house. Transitions are difficult. That's number 1. Number 2, the soul can perform mitzvot only in this world. It mourns the loss of this opportunity. As remember, if we learned last week, one of the rabbis, Rabbi Chia, when he before he was passing away, he was crying, and his students asked him, "Why are you crying?" And he explained, "Because I no longer have the opportunity to perform mitzvot." And we learned last week that a soul, what it can accomplish in this world with mitzvot, is tremendous, tremendous feat. And number three, the soul and the body, they bond over time and develop an attachment. Breaking an attachment is traumatic. So think about a husband and wife. They have a rocky relationship. They love each other, but they fight. So if they separate, if they divorce, it's still going to be a tremendously difficult time and separation. So hold that thought for a second, and let's just look at the next video. Second, let's show you the next video right over here.
Welcome to our meditation reflection for Lesson 2 of Journey of the Soul. We're going to try to visualize and relate to the idea of the continuing connection between those who are still inhabiting this world and their loved ones who have moved on. How can we visualize this connection? So I want to share with you a metaphor that was given by the Lubavitcher Rebbe to a grieving family when they lost their dear mother. The Rebbe told the family, "You should know that your loved one, when they pass away, hasn't gone to some faraway place. Really, what is the situation? It's as if the whole family is together on the first floor of the house, and this loved one is in the same house with you on the second floor." So we're going to try to visualize. Again, if it helps you to close your eyes, you can close your eyes. If you want to leave your eyes open, leave your eyes open. But start to visualize in your mind's eye a loved one who's passed on. Try to imagine what it was like when you would gather and that person was physically with you. Try to remember the sights, the sounds, the whole setting. And now, imagine that exact same gathering, same setting, and that loved one who's passed on is still there, with one difference. They're on the second floor. Take a moment to imagine the feeling. It's hard to describe it, but if we envision it, we may be able to feel it. What does it feel like? The knowledge that this loved one, you may not be able to see them, but they're right there, very, very close by, in the same house, where the family is together, everyone is there, and the only difference is they're upstairs, they're on the second floor. Let's try to envision, let's try to visualize a loved one. Try to remember what it was like when they were on the first floor. And now think about the exact same setting. What does it feel like? What does it feel like knowing that they're on the second floor? They're with us. They're with us. They're in the same house. They're only just a few feet away. Not far, far, far away. Very close by on the second floor. Take a half a minute to visualize and try to connect to this feeling of the loved one on the second floor.
Okay, that's a very, 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 very powerful meditation there. Back to the PowerPoint here. So the end of life, as the Zohar just said, is tremendously powerful. And I got to tell you, I read a Facebook post just a couple of days ago, and I cried. The first time in many, many, many years, I was crying. There's a Chabad rabbi, his name's Rabbi Yehuda Dukes, who passed away from COVID-19. And his wife's like a lioness. Very, I mean, unbelievable. He got COVID in March. I think he was one of the worst COVID infected, he was here in NYU. And his wife wrote this tremendous post, but it was describing the moment of the end of death, the end of life, as her dear beloved husband's soul left its body. And she was describing that she was there alone. She was there with family members overnight, and at one point she turned to her husband and she said, I know that I told you to fight and to stay and to do everything you can, but I realized maybe I was wrong and it's okay to let go. That's what she told him. And in the morning, when it was just her and her son there, she felt that his soul was about to leave. And, she saw the machines going haywire, and she put on like a nigun, like a tape of the Rebbe, because when the soul leaves the body, it hears a holy spiritual tune. It's a tremendously auspicious time. And she said just then, her son is 12 years old, her other son is 12 years old, and her son really wanted her husband, the father, to be at his bar mitzvah. So he was upset, he was crying, and it was just like as the soul's leaving or had just left, and she turned to her son and she said, you should know your father is here with us now even more than ever. And the son put on tefillin, and he laning that he's doing in 3 months. And she told her son, your father is here at your bar mitzvah. And it was a very moving piece. I was crying. And that's the description of the end of life, the transition that the soul feels as it leaves the body. And as the Zohar said, in the words of the Zohar, nothing is as hard for the soul as its separation from the body, as we learned in the source here. That's why the end of life comfort, reminiscing about good memories is good, physical contact, you touch the person, quiet presence of a loved one, comforting atmosphere. Okay, and the reasoning why it's so difficult is because this is ultimate transition. It can't do any mitzvot, a powerful bond is broken, as we learned before. Okay, now we're going to go into these 3 stages. Let's get back to this book. Right up again. Okay, so there are transitions. So remember, the soul, it's very difficult for the soul to leave the body, and therefore there are transitions. As we'll learn now, there's the first 3 days, the 7 days, the 30 days, and then the 1-year period, which is the whole idea of the mourning and the shiva and the shloshim. And the year of mourning is all based around this idea that the soul, it takes time. Because the separation is so painful, it takes time for the soul to actually leave the body. So text number 3 in front of you. This is from the Jerusalem Talmud. For 3 days, the soul hovers above the body, thinking that it can return to it. After 3 days, when it sees that the body's face has changed, it leaves the body and departs. So the soul, the entire soul, remember the 2 parts of the soul, the nefesh and the ruach, are actually hovering above the body. By the way, anytime anybody has questions, just unmute yourself and ask. So anytime the soul hovers above, it's there hovering above the body, thinking, let me return. But after 3 days, when the body's face is starting to change, decomposing or whatever, it leaves the body and it departs. And remember, the part of the soul that stays in the body is called the nefesh, like we learned before, that there is a part which does stay there. Okay, that's the first 3 days. By the way, the reason why the soul stays there is, like we learned, it's very difficult to separate. It's been in the body for so long, 70, 80, 90, 100 years, and it kind of feels attached to the body and therefore doesn't leave right away.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
So if the soul hovers over the body, we bury that body right away. So where is it hovering? If it's not with us here in our presence, where is it hovering? Because now the body is physically not here with us. It's buried.
So at the grave, But specifically, the answer to your question will become even more clear in the next source. Look at the next source, the first 7 days, the same Zohar continues. He says, for 7 days, the soul goes from the house where it lived to the grave, and from the grave back to the house, and it mourns its body. After 7 days, the body is subjected to its fate, and the soul ascends to its place. You see, this is the idea of the Shiva. This is why, for example, the custom is in the Shiva house to cover the mirrors. One of the reasons why we cover the mirrors, we put like a little curtain over all mirrors in the house, is because the soul is present in the Shiva house. And the soul, when it sees a mirror, it like kind of sees a reflection of itself, and it's, even though it's not physical, spiritual, but that's what it says in Kabbalah. And therefore it's like the soul doesn't like it. So we cover the mirrors, just as one example. But it goes from the house to the grave, the house to the grave, the house to the grave for the first 7 days, which is the idea of Shiva. And then the 30 days, look at the next source, same Zohar continues. For 30 days, the soul and the body are judged as one, and thus the soul is located down here on earth. After that, the soul ascends while the body erodes in the earth. Okay, so even though he said after 7 days, the soul kind of ascends to its place, but it's still, for the first 30 days, it's still somehow connected here on earth. And after 30 days, the soul kind of leaves the body, which is again the concept of shloshim, 30 days, which there are customs. I'm not going to get to the actual customs now of the 30 days. And then the Zohar continues, look at 4c, but this is from the Talmud Shabbat. For 12 months, the body still exists, and the soul ascends and descends. After 12 months, the body becomes null, and the soul rises and no longer returns.
Excuse me, Rabbi.
Yes, yes.
I was wondering, what does it mean when it says that the soul, the body and the soul are judged as one? What do you mean by that?
Okay.
What's the body judged if the...
Right. So I wouldn't. Okay, I'll tell you what it is. First of all, there's a judgment that happens for the. Okay, let me get into it. Okay, let me explain. So the body and the soul.
Sorry.
No problem. When the soul goes up to heaven, so there's a heavenly court and judgment for the soul. Just as an example, and I repeat this all the time because it's so important, there are 4 questions, first 4 questions that a soul is asked when he or she pass away and come to the heavenly court. The first question is, during your life, were you honest in business? Not did you fast on Yom Kippur, not did you light Shabbat candles, or you put on tefillin, which are all very, very important, don't forget them. But the first question the soul is asked is when you were in your body, and this is the answer to your question, soul and body judges one. When you were in your body, did you observe business honestly? Were you honest in business? Question number 2, which the soul is asked, is Kavata itim la Torah. Did you set aside times to study Torah? And right, and you come to the JLI course. Is a good thing. It's called setting aside times to study Torah. Number 3, asakta v'periya. Did you actively try to have children? Obviously, somebody who's not able to have children, something else. And number 4, did you yearn for the coming of Mashiach? Let me see. There's a question on the chat here. So even though it talks about the soul, are we still assuming there's a nefesh ruach division where a part remains in the body and a part ascends? Yes. Yes, and we'll get to this, Laurie, we'll get to your question in momentarily to explain more what is in the body versus what goes up. But let me just get back to the source. Right.
I just have one more question.
Yes, yes.
When you said that the body and, sorry.
Yeah,
When you said that the body and the soul goes from the Shiva house from where it lived?
Yes.
From the Shiva house or from where it lived?
From where it lived, from the house where it lived. And we'll see soon about the Shiva house.
So
when there's
not from the Shiva house. Yeah.
It's specifically from the place where it lived. But I'll show you in a second specifically something about the Shiva house in one of the next sources, I think it says. But just look at the summary of what we learned so far. So the first 3 days, the soul hovers over the body. 7 days, the soul vacillates between the grave and its home. 30 days, the soul is still located on earth. 12 months, the soul vacillates between heaven and earth, but mostly in heaven, but comes back and forth. And we'll see now after 12 months what happens. That these are stages of the soul's, so to speak, divorce from the body, right? Think of a husband and wife that love each other and they get divorced. You know, there's stages, of getting divorced. So because of this, there's 4 stages of mourning, the degree of mourning, mourn for the soul. Let's look at this inside this part. Hold on. It's right over here. Hold on. Yeah. Okay. So because of these stages, look at the source in front of you. Because of these stages, the mourning is also phased. The mourners observe, this is from the Rambam Nalacha, mourners observe 3 days of weeping, 7 days of eulogies. Now, the Shiva is obviously 7 days is what we do today. I think halachically, I don't think there's a difference between the first 3 days versus first 7 days, but the first 3 days are more intense. This is what it means, practically speaking, for today. And for 30 days, restrictions on haircuts, right? Shloishim, what's called, and wearing freshly ironed clothing, marrying, joining a celebration of friends, and traveling on business, as opposed to the 30 days versus the 12 months. And therefore, you have these degrees of mourning. Now, what happens after 12 months or after 30 days? Look at text number 6, and this is the halacha today from your Rabbi Yosef Karo, who was the mechaber. If you encounter an acquaintance within 30 days of that person having lost the next of kin, offer words of consolation and avoid the customary pleasantries. You basically, by the way, elsewhere in Pirkei Avot, the Torah says, if you come to a shiva house, you know what you're supposed to say? You're actually supposed to say nothing. You're supposed to be quiet. There's nothing you can say. What are you going to tell somebody who's in the mourning? And therefore, the Torah instituted that you should say, may God comfort you with all the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. But essentially, you're just listening. You're just there to be there with the person. But if you encounter an acquaintance within 30 days, meaning after Shiva, offer words of consolation and avoid the customary pleasantries. In other words, it's still like, if 30 days have elapsed since the relative's passing, greet your acquaintance, right? You can say shalom, you can say hi, how are you? In the usual manner, and offer indirect words of consolation. Avoid mentioning the deceased by name and extend the generic consolations such as may you be comforted. If your acquaintance is mourning the loss of a parent, you should offer direct messages of comfort for the first 12 months, and only after that scale it back to indirect consolation. Practically speaking, today it's the shiva that we just go and we listen. The reason why the source is mentioned here is to show you that there's degrees of the soul leaving the body correspond to the mourning period: 3 days, 7 days, 30 days, and then the 1 year period. So I think somebody asked us before, I don't remember who, but here it is. This is the source that you asked about, the shiva house versus the house. So but because of what we learned till now, look at source number 7. It says like this: if a person dies and leaves no next of kin to be comforted, right? What happens if a person dies but has no children, has nobody? So 10 people should go and sit in the deceased home. First of all, any kindness associated with a person who died is called chesed shel emet. It's called true kindness because you're not anticipating any favor in return. But if you have somebody who doesn't have any next of kin and no relatives, 10 people should go and sit in the deceased home. What do you mean? What are we doing there? We're not going to mourn for somebody, right? We're not going to pay a shiva call. So why on earth are we going to the house where the person lived if we're not if we're not comforting somebody? A man died in Rabbi Yehuda's neighborhood. As there were no mourners to be comforted, Rabbi Yehuda assembled 10 people every day, and they sat in the deceased home. After 7 days, the dead man appeared to Rabbi Yehuda in a dream and said, may your mind be at rest, for you have set my mind at rest. And the reason for this is because, as we learned before, the soul goes between the grave and the house where he or she lived. So therefore, you're actually comforting the soul. Shiva is not just about comforting the mourners, the ones who are left behind. It's also about comforting the actual soul. Because remember, we learned the soul leaving the body is a tremendously painful experience for it. I think your question was before if the soul is in the Shiva house or the house where the person lived, if I'm not mistaken. This doesn't answer that, actually. right? That was your question. What happens if
Yeah,
this?
right. I was
Yeah,
wondering. Yeah, what
what?
happens if there's nobody sitting shiva in the if nobody's sitting shiva in the deceased home,
Right.
then does the soul go to the place of shiva?
Right. Good question. I don't remember offhand. If I'm not mistaken, some of it is partially in the home, and some of it is also with its relatives where they're sitting shiva. But I would have to check that 100% to get back to you 100%.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Sure. Okay. So until now, remember in the beginning of the class, we said there's 4 parts to this class. I'm going to tell you again what they are. Section 1, we discussed the spiritual significance of the moment of a person's passing. And then now we spoke about already the process of the soul's departure from the body. Now we're going to go into the third part, which is the Jewish tradition surrounding the care of the body and the deceased and its interments and why. Okay, so you have it handing the body in front of you. Right? Is a lifeless body worthless once the soul's earthly container has been emptied? The soul's potent divine force, does its significance expire? Okay. Okay. There's a mitzvah. I remember when I was learning in yeshiva in Kfar Chabad in Israel. Kfar Chabad is a little village. Now it says when you learn Torah, there's like nothing more important than learning Torah. Learning Torah is like paramount importance. You never stop your learning of the Torah, and the Talmud goes into if there's different mitzvot that have to be done. No, you don't stop. You start learning Torah. Continue learning Torah. But if there is a person who is being buried, it is a mitzvah for everybody to stop learning Torah and go escort the deceased, even if it's just a few steps, even if you're not going to the actual grave, right? The funerals happen in that case in Kfar Chabad, and the actual burial would take place in a cemetery somewhere else. But we would all stop our learning and do it. In Crown Heights, which is a city today, like store owners, yeshivas, all close for the 10, 15, 20 minutes when there's a funeral coming past 770 Chabad headquarters, even though it's going to Queens to be buried. Because that's how important escorting the dead body is, and as we'll see in a second, which by the way, the reason I'm saying is because when you have this mitzvah of accompanying and escorting the deceased to burial, it shows you how important the body is, even though how important the mitzvah is, even though the soul has left the body. The body is the mitzvah of escorting the dead and being there with the dead. It's considered tremendous respect and honor for the soul. You're paying honor for the deceased. That's what it is. So based on this, text number 8a, the Talmud says, one who is present at the time of a person's passing is required to tear their clothing. This is because a person's passing is likened to the burning of a Torah scroll. Now, practically speaking, the only people who tear their clothing are the actual mourners, the relatives of the deceased. But the actual Talmud said, it's not halakha practically today, but the actual Talmud said when you are present at the time of a person's passing, you are actually required to tear your clothing. Right? Why is that? Because just like when a Sefer Torah is burnt, it's considered like a terrible, terrible, terrible thing. The same reaction is when a person passes away and moves from this world into another world. It's that same idea. As Nachmanides says, text number 8a, Nachmanides points to the sacred names of God that are inked onto a Torah scroll parchment as an analogy for the sacred soul that is installed within the corporeal body. Let me explain. Okay, so let me explain this. When you have a Sefer Torah, when you have a Torah, which is considered the holiest item, so you have physical parchment. That parchment is not holy at all. Physical parchment, and then you take physical ink, right? Ink is not holy. Ink, I can take ink and throw it and do whatever I want with it. So that's the ink, and I can take the parchment. Nothing's holy at all. But once the scribe takes Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim et haaretz, he starts writing the Torah, he infuses that physical ink and that physical parchment with the greatest holiness that exists. The same thing is with a physical body. Once a soul, a holy soul, a part of God connects to it. Let's read that again now. Okay, so Nachmanides points to the sacred names of God that are inked onto a Torah scroll's parchment as an analogy for the sacred soul that is installed within the corporeal body. So the body of a Jew, according to Nachmanides, and this is the way it is basically like a parchment of a Sefer Torah. And the soul is that holiness that is imbued into the Torah scroll, into the physical parchment. That is the soul. So when you have that connection, you have the holiest item as well. And just like the physical parchment becomes holy, the physical body becomes holy. So when a person passes away, it's like the Torah scroll, which is being burnt, which is why you have to tear your clothing. Just like when you see a Torah scroll being burnt, you need to tear your clothing, you tear your clothing when that soul leaves the body as well. All right, remember, the soul is literally a part of God. Literally. Okay, let's see this on the screen right over here. Okay, so as we learned, Halvayatam, escorting the dead, the deceased senses our presence and appreciates it. When you're escorting the dead, you're actually doing a favor for the deceased person. And that is what makes it such a tremendous, tremendous mitzvah. And it's called Chesed Shel Emet. I remember when a lady passed away in our community. It was in the summer, it was in the height of COVID. It was when COVID, where people were afraid and there was nobody to come. I needed a minyan. We got together 10 people from the community and we all went to Queens. It was a Friday afternoon. It was a terrible time, and we all went there, and it was a great mitzvah, and everybody felt so good because you know the dead person is never going to pay you back, never. But it's considered one of the greatest mitzvot that there is to ensure that there's a minyan and saying Kaddish, as we'll see now all the rites and everything else. But the point is, look at the screen in front of you. The deceased senses our presence and appreciates it tremendously, so much so that you stop all learning Torah, which you're not allowed to stop for anything. You stop learning Torah. By the way, we as yeshiva students, we used to love it. We got a break, a 15-minute break. We used to love the mitzvah, of escorting the dead person. Okay, so here's the comparison, right? So you have a beautiful screen in front of you. The human being begins as flesh and bones, and then the soul is infused and body becomes holy, right? There's stages of when the soul comes in. I'm not going to discuss it now, but basically at the baby naming for a girl, that's when the soul comes into the body, and then at the bat mitzvah, or a bris of a boy, and then at his bar mitzvah, that's when the soul is finally in the body, which is why the idea of a bar and bat mitzvah, you become an adult and you have to observe Torah and mitzvot, because that's when your soul is fully 100% in your body as one. And the same thing as the Torah scroll begins as an animal hide, God's name is inscribed upon it, and the parchment becomes holy. And therefore, at its separation, when you see a Torah scroll being burned, it's a terrible, terrible, terrible loss. Same thing is when a human person passes away. That's how terrible it is. Okay, now we're going to talk about the pre-burial rites and rules, but to do this, let me get back to the other screen. Okay. Text number 9. So now we're going to talk about the Chevra Kadisha, the interment, this tremendous mitzvah of being part of the Chevra Kadisha. So it says like this: all who tend to a corpse must be aware that they are handling a holy entity. The human body is more than simply a sheath to a sacred entity, a tool that serves a supernal soul. Rather, it has itself become sanctified with an independent holiness similar to a Torah scroll. So when you are tending to that body, there are certain things that you need to do. You need to take the body and dip it in a mikveh, for example. You need to clean the body. There are people who are trained in this, called the Chevra Kadisha. I remember when a dear friend of mine passed away just a year or two. He actually passed away January, right before Corona. His name's Charles Gladder. May his name be a memory. Shai Ben Edith. May his memory be a blessing. But I remember his wife called me as he had passed away, and the first thing I got to the body, it was in his house still, and the Chevra Kadisha hadn't been there yet. I called the Chevra Kadisha to come, but the rules and regulations of the body, for example, you're supposed to light a candle right then, because the soul, remember, is still there. You're supposed to open a window in case the soul wants to go out, and you're supposed to say Tehillim, you're supposed to recite Tehillim. I remember reciting Tehillim, it took them a while to come. I was reciting Tehillim for at least an hour or two, Also, we never, ever leave the body alone. There's something called the Chominera, which is considered a tremendous mitzvah. A Chominera, so by the way, there are ladies who train to do it for ladies and men for men. But a Chominera means you don't leave the body alone. You never leave the body alone until it's actually buried. So all these things have to be done for the person, and every sizable community has a Chavra Kadisha, what's called. You need a Chavra Kadisha, or people who are maintained to preserve the dignity and preserve these rules, basically. Okay, next source, text number 10. We are required to maintain constant watch over a corpse, as I explained. It's called a Chominera, even during the daytime. And even if there's no cause to suspect that something can happen to the body, those who maintain watch are actively performing a mitzvah. Now listen to this, to the extent that they are meanwhile absolved from many other mitzvot, such as reading the Shema and reciting the prayers at the appropriate times. So if you are in the middle of watching the body, you do not have to recite Shema, you do not have to pray, you do not have to put on tefillin, because when you're in the middle of a mitzvah, you are exempt from any other mitzvahs. That's how important this mitzvah is. We maintain a watch over the dead out of respect. If we were to leave the body alone, it would appear as if we have abandoned it like a utensil that we no longer require. And therefore, you see the figure in front of you, the body is handled with respect and dignity. The deceased is covered at all times. That's the first thing we did, by the way, with the body a year ago. I covered the body. The body is gently cleansed and dressed in shrouds. The body is never placed face down. There's rules about this. Light-hearted conversation is avoided in the presence of the deceased, and a guard remains in proximity at all times out of respect for the deceased. By the way, in Israel, I'm sure a lot of you have seen this. In Israel, there's a tremendous organization called Zakah. Zakah is basically people, whenever there's a terrorist attack in Israel, and God forbid, it's all over the news, a terrorist attack, especially with those bombs that went off, may never happen again. But God forbid, there's body parts splattered all over the place. The Zakah come and literally with equipment, they come and take every single part of body, of limb, of an organ, of blood that they could possibly find with the greatest amount of dignity, and they come and they bury this together with the body, because it's considered a tremendous mitzvah. Zakah, I mean, these guys are tzaddikim, you've actually probably seen them on television, these group of Orthodox Jews, and they do this. Why is every single body part so important? So look at the next source. He actually explains. Again, anybody has any questions in the meantime, just stop me and ask away. And the reason why every single body part is so important is because text 11, there's no differentiation in reverential treatment between a complete Torah scroll and a single letter that has become detached from a Torah scroll. Similarly, it is forbidden to handle with disrespect even a single bone that has become detached from a sacred body that was created in God's image. By the way, that's why we find in Europe, for example, there are for cemeteries, a grave that has been desecrated. The Chabad rabbis in the forlorn parts of Europe, I don't remember these cities, that take care of graves years ago. Well, what do we care? No, because these are sacred bodies that were created in God's image, and we have to take care of every single body part, just like a single letter of the Torah. If you have an aleph which is scratched out a little bit, the whole entire Torah is invalid. The same thing is over here. If one part is not good, then the whole thing is that. So the point is that even after death, we have to treat the body with tremendous amount of respect, and therefore there's so many laws governing it. Okay. Now we get to, I think, one of the most important parts of the lesson. But let me just show you the screen here. Okay, here's just what we learned, a summary of what we just learned. Pre-burial rites and rules, body handled with respect and dignity, cleaned and dressed in shrouds, no casual conversation, kept covered, never placed face down, always guarded. By the way, if anybody wants to join the Chavra Kadisha, it's a tremendous mitzvah. Okay, now we get to this part, which unfortunately amongst American Jewry is a huge deal. So first of all, like this. First of all, before we get to that huge deal, text number 12, in Deuteronomy, it says you shall surely bury him on the same day as his death. In Israel, this is like a huge thing. A person passes away that same day. It doesn't matter what day of the week it is. It doesn't matter how inconvenient it is. We bury the person the same day. Okay? But that's not what I wanted to show you here. What I did want to show you is, yeah, okay. Text number 13. And specifically what we're going to talk about is cremation versus burial. Okay, cremation amongst American Jews is rising. It's on the rise. I think in the 1950s or 60s it was like 3%. Today it's like 60, 70%. I'm not going to talk about people who have been cremated. If you have a loved one or you know somebody who has been cremated, what is their status? We don't blame anybody, and everything's going to be fine. Everything's good. You know, the Holocaust, a lot of Jews were burnt. But we're talking about for the future. If anybody has any plans or knows a relative or something or whatever, it's a tremendous idea not to be cremated. And the reason for that is text number 13. People proceed to their eternal abodes, and the mourners go about the streets. The dust returns to the earth as it was, while the spirit returns to God who bestowed it. We learned last week, we quoted it. Oh, I think he quoted it in text number 14. See, this is from Bereshit. For you are dust and you will return to dust. It says, when God created Adam, when he created the body, he created him from the dust of the earth. So because we were created from the dust of the earth, we need to return to the dust. The body comes from the earth, and it is entrusted as a deposit to the individual's care. Upon death, the deposit must be returned to the earth from where it came and buried there. This is a fundamental and vital and important concept in Judaism, that the body not be cremated, the body not, by the way, this is one of the reasons, again, I don't want to talk about it, but tattoos, for example, we don't do tattoos, we don't harm the body. Not to harm the body doesn't belong to you. The body was given to you, was entrusted to you from God, and you cannot harm it. So therefore, cremation is totally and utterly gone. A human being is a custodian, basically, to his body, and you have to return the deposit. God gave you the deposit, you have to return it. By the way, we find this in it says, by the way, with the first murder in history was when Cain killed Hevel, and it says that Adam, the father who was mourning his beloved son Hevel, who had just been murdered, didn't know what to do. So it says in the Midrash that he saw a raven bury its dead. So he realized, you know, the fellow bird that had died, and the raven buried it. So he realized, that's how you take care of it. So he realized, that's what I need to do. I need to bury my son as well, and that's how he buried him. But you find, by the way, Abraham went to great lengths to bury his wife Sarah, right? Hebron, the whole idea of Hebron, where he paid an exorbitant price for a burial plot. We know that Yitzchak and Ishmael buried their father Abraham. This is in Bereshit. We know that Jacob buried his wife Rachel, Kever Rachel, and we know that Jacob requested of his son Joseph that he be buried in Israel as well. But Joseph, also his last request to his children were that they take his bones after they leave Egypt and take it back to Israel. Right, if you read recently the reports of the Israeli army, they found the two soldiers. I don't remember their names. You guys remember Zachariah Bamel, I think, right? Who had passed away in 1982, and Israel's taking care of their dead 92, like 30, 35 years later. That's insane. Why? Because we have the utmost respect and reverence for body parts, and that's why, you know, even today there's IDF soldiers who in 2014, like Adar Golden, we still don't have his body, and Israel will go to great lengths to find his body because it's tremendous mitzvah. By the way, the rates in America is actually 60% cremation. That's what I see up here, 60%. You see, burial, why is it so important? Again, to summarize, number one, because we are showing that our bodies are not ours, they belong to God. And number two, which I want to mention here, is resurrection of the dead. We believe, and we say this is one of the 13 principles of our faith. We believe that Ani ma'amin be'emunah shlema be'viat HaMashiach, right? Mashiach is going to come, but also in Tchiyat HaMetim. Tchiyat HaMetim means the resurrection of the dead. Belief in the resurrection of the dead, right? How are the dead going to come up? In the last body that they were inhabiting. So the soul was inhabiting Mr. X in his or Mrs. X in her body. The soul, the body is going to be resurrected in the same body that it came up from. And if a person is cremated, let's just say it's a big problem, you know, we'll deal with it, but that's why burying a body intact is so important, right? Number one, again, the idea that the body is not ours, it belongs to God, it's only a pikadon, it's only we borrowed it. And number two, the resurrection of the dead. Okay, now.
I'm sorry, Rabbi Bigler.
Yes, yes.
So the last body comes back in Chesed Mason?
Yes.
So that's the body that comes back, not the other bodies that the soul ever belonged in?
So to explain your questions, right? So every single one of us has been resurrected many times, right? The reason why we come again and again and again is because we haven't fulfilled our mission in the previous lifetime, so we need to come and be resurrected again and again and again. When Mashiach comes and we are going to be ultimately resurrected, and we're going to live forever, we're going to come in the same body that we was in our last lifetime. Which is why, for example, it says when Mashiach comes, there's going to be tremendous laughter in the streets. Why is there going to be laughter? So I'll give you an example. My grandfather was a Jew living in Mea Shearim in Jerusalem, and he passed away with a big, long, white beard at the age of, I think, 78. Okay, my grandfather. So my grandfather, when he's going to be resurrected, God willing, very, very soon, he's going to be resurrected as an old man with his white beard, right? That's the way he passed away. But his father, right, my grandfather's father, so my great-grandfather was beaten to death at the age of 23 by the Turkish police in Jerusalem. So when he will be resurrected as he passed away, as a 23-year-old man with a little, black beard. So you can have father and son walking together, and the father will look much younger than the son. There's going to be a lot of laughter in the streets. That's what it says in the Medrash.
So not all bodies will be resurrected.
All souls will be resurrected.
Right.
The body, the last body that a person lived in will be resurrected. Yes. Yes. And remember, because who are you? This is what we learned last week. You are your soul. Your body is just like nothing. Your body is nothing. You are your soul. So you want your soul is going to be resurrected. Okay. And that is okay. So this is what it says. This is the summary. Entrusted as a deposit. The body comes from the earth, and the deposit must be returned to where it came from. So that's reason number one why we do burial. Burial is affirmation. We believe our bodies belong to God. It's not for us to decide how to inter the body. And resurrection of the dead. Just briefly also about the resurrection of the dead. This is the reason why Jacob wanted to be buried in Israel, because when you are resurrected, you're actually going to be resurrected in Israel. So if a person passed away and was buried in America or South Africa, wherever it is, he's actually going to roll in tunnels under the ground till he or she reach Israel, and they will be resurrected in Israel. But that's just one reason why a lot of people want to be buried in Israel. Okay, so prohibition against cremation associated with some of Judaism's core beliefs. Cremation constitutes irrevocable statement. Now, what happens if the person himself wrote in his or her will, I want to be cremated. I want to be cremated. I have this all the time. Unfortunately, I want to be cremated, and I come now in the person's family, and they told me, Rabbi, I know I'm not allowed to do cremation, but my father or my mother requested that I be cremated. What do I do now? Right? So first of all, this is a big problem. Big problem. But look at the screen in front of you. It's a mitzvah to implement express wishes of the deceased. Yes, if the deceased had wishes, it's a mitzvah to do what they want. But if a person requested not to be buried and to be cremated, we disregard this request. Administrating a Jewish burial is granting what the deceased wants presently. And to explain this more in depth is right over here. Okay, so final wishes, text number 15a. It is a mitzvah to implement the express final wishes of the deceased, right? The deceased has in his final will, he writes X, Y, and Z. It's a real mitzvah to fulfill his wishes. But in text number 15b, if a person requested not to be buried, we disregard this request. This is because burial is a mitzvah, as it is stated, you shall surely bury him. In other words, like this: when the person put in his or her will, I don't want to be buried, I want to be cremated, they weren't aware of the truth. Remember that the soul, once the soul leaves the body, it is aware of the truth. It is aware that it is painful and harm to the soul to now be cremated. So by actually not cremating the person, by burying the person, you're fulfilling the present wishes of the soul. The soul senses the truth that right now I should not be cremated at all. Remember that meditation in the beginning, the soul senses the truth, the soul knows the truth, the soul knows everything. Okay? And this brings us now to the final part of tonight's lesson, grave visitation. So, what is it about graves? Why do we go there all the time? What happens there? You know, I remember my grandfather, which I just mentioned, my grandfather would always go as a child. He was orphaned, right? At the age of 3 or 4 years old, his father passed away. His father was 23, beaten up by the Turkish police. Every single Friday, my grandfather would go to his parents' graves and talk to them. Just tell them about his week, what happened, how's he doing, how's he coping. And this was tremendous therapy. This was pre, you know, when everybody went to therapy. But he would actually talk to his parents every single Friday as an orphan in Jerusalem, just to talk to them about his week, about what happened, how he's doing, how he's feeling. Now, is that just nothing? What is the significance of that? What is that? Let's see. So text number 16. Okay. The nefesh remains present in the grave. As we learned, there's a nefesh and there's a ruach. The nefesh remains present in the grave. Due to the fact that it remains among the living, it is acquainted with their pain. At their time of need, it pleads with God for mercy on their behalf. When the inhabitants of the world are in need, when they are in sorrow and visit the cemetery, the nefesh is aroused to their plight. It ascends and awakens the ruach, which in turn entreats God for mercy. Consequently, the Holy One, blessed be He, has mercy on the world. So when a person goes to pray at his or her parents, so first of all, when he or she have pain or suffering, they can ask their parents to help them. Ask your parents. You have connection, so to speak, with God. Ask God to help you, to intercede, to go pray on your behalf. Remember, the Ruach is there. Remember that meditation in the beginning. The Ruach is not limited to anything or anyone or anywhere. The Ruach can do what it wants, when it wants, how it wants. It's not limited to the physical body, and therefore it can pray on your behalf, which is why we go to the grave of a tzaddik, which is why I go and I take all of you to the grave of the Rebbe, the oil. Why? Because the Rebbe is a tzaddik and it has super, super special connection, so to speak, on high, and the nefesh part of the tzaddik is in the grave and remains there and is attuned to the suffering of the people in the generation, and therefore it can go and ask the ruach part to pray on your behalf. Okay, text number 17. There was once a community that wished to relocate. One of the deceased buried in the vicinity appeared in a dream to a member of the community and pleaded, please do not abandon us, for we appreciate your visits to our cemetery. Barzilai the Gileadite declared, I would like to die in my own city. He wished for this because the deceased appreciate when their loved ones visit their graves and request goodness for their souls. This improves their condition in heaven, and when we pray on behalf of the deceased, they pray for us in turn. So text number 16 is what we gain from visiting the graves of our beloved. And text number 17 is what the soul gains and derives, and the benefit that it derives from your visit. Right, when you go say Kaddish and learn Mishnayot at the grave, and when you go on the yard site of the person to pray there and daven there, it causes a tremendous elevation. By the way, my friend Charles, who I mentioned, passed away. So on the 11 months at the end of the Kaddish, it was a snowy day, freezing cold day, just like a month ago. We got 10 people to go to his grave, and then a month later on his yard site again, it was free. At those 2 days were the coldest days of the year, and we went there again right there in Queens, just over the bridge, and we went to pray. You know, he's a friend of mine, and I know that this is something that he'll never be able to reciprocate, but it's something to give him to say Kaddish at his grave. We studied some Torah, and this elevates his soul. That's why, by the way, you throw a Kiddush, you sponsor a Kiddush on the yard site of your loved one. You give charity. All these things are giving things, items to your beloved, and they actually feel it.
Rabbi, excuse me, what if you
Yes.
can't actually go to the grave?
Okay. If you can't actually go to the grave, what you could do is like I just mentioned, you throw a Kiddush, for example, you give charity, you can learn Mishnayot, you could do a lot of things. Obviously, it's better to go to the grave, but you don't have to go to the grave, especially if it's another country, if it's COVID, you could do all these things without actually going to the grave as well, even though it's much, much better to go to the grave.
And does the soul like feel it in the same way if it's not in that place and time?
Again, it's like sending a gift. So let's think of a gift of $100 versus $120. It's still a gift, still great, but it's not 120, it's 100, right? Yeah, as you see in the source in front of the screen in front of you. So visiting the grave is respect for the departed, memory has not been forgotten, and reinforces our continuous connection. In other words, you are connected with the soul of your loved one after they pass away. You are connected, truly. Right? The graveside communication point is what we just learned. God, the Ruach, and the Nefesh. God, Ruach, entreats God. The Ruach, the Nefesh, awakens the Ruach. And the Nefesh, when people visit the grave, the Nefesh is aroused. Okay, the Nefesh, how do we see this? The Nefesh is present amongst the people who feel their pain. Okay, the dead appreciate visitors. And again, that's why as visitors, it is important to go to the grave. Connection is mutual, and there are special days to visit the grave, which is specifically the Yortzeit. Okay, 1 second. Before we play the key points, I just want to show you, yeah? Okay, this is the final source, which is a letter of the Rebbe on this subject. This is a letter written in 1958 by the Rebbe to a woman who was grieving tremendous pain. And here's what he writes. Here we go. Blessing and greeting. I received your undated letters in which you write about your emotional upsets in connection with the passing of your mother and the questions which are troubling you in this connection, involving also questions in regard to the passing of your father, peace unto them. So this woman had lost her mother, which like very recently, and then her father as well. Another fundamental point to remember, which is a direct bearing on your letter, is that all believers in God believe also in the survival of the soul. Actually, this principle has even been discovered in this physical world, which science now holds as an absolute truth, that nothing in this physical world can be absolutely destroyed. That is a scientific thing. How much more so in the spiritual world, especially in the case of the soul, which in no way can be affected by the death and disintegration of the physical body. It would be silly and illogical to assume that because a certain organ of the body ceases to function, affecting other physical organs of the body, the spiritual soul would also be affected thereby. The truth is that when the physical body ceases to function, the soul continues its existence, as we learned last week and this week, not only as before, but even on a higher level, in as much as it is no longer handicapped by the restraints of the physical frame, as we learned today. Thirdly, the attachment of children to their parents and the general attachment between close relatives during life on this earth is surely not a physical attachment by the respect of physical bodies of the relatives. Right? The reason why you love your wife, your husband, your father, your mother, your brother, your sister, it's not just a physical body you love, it's a spiritual soul connection. Essentially, the attachment is a spiritual one due to the spiritual affinity between those concerned and the qualities of the soul, including such spiritual things as character, kindness, goodness, etc., all of which are attributes of the soul and not of the body. Therefore, also, every action on the part of a person in relation to a beloved person and the desire to benefit that person is not directed towards pleasing his physical body, his bones and tissue, but is the spiritual pleasure that one is concerned with. In view of the above, it is clear that even after the physical body has disintegrated and disappeared from view, it is still possible to bring joy and benefit to the soul, which is noted above, not only survives, but does so on a higher level. And all the things which had previously brought joy and pleasure to one's parents will continue to do so, even after they are physically no longer here. Okay, and let me just play for you a summary of what we learned today. Beautiful summary, the key point video. Right over here.
Lesson 2. Taking leave. 1. Nefesh and Ruach are two of the soul's components. After death, the Nefesh remains with the body, while the Ruach disengages and ascends to Gan Eden, paradise. 2. Once the Ruach is no longer limited to material existence, it's more accessible to all who wish to connect to it. Thus, when a person dies, our ability to spiritually connect with him or her is stronger and deeper than before. 3. Though the Nefesh remains in the grave, it retains a connection with the higher levels of the soul. The gravesite is thus a portal where we can communicate with departed souls and ask them to intercede before God on our behalf. 4. Over the course of a lifetime, the soul and body integrate and bond. Their separation at death is therefore painful for the soul. 5. The soul departs the body in stages. These stages correspond to the prescribed periods of mourning. When we mourn, we are mourning not only for the deceased, but also with the deceased. 6. Dignity and sensitivity are the underlying principles that guide the care of a corpse and its preparation for burial. This is because even after death, the body retains its special status of having been the container for the soul. 7. Burial is of highest priority in Jewish tradition and culture. When God takes a person's soul, we are tasked to return the body to the place from which God fashioned it. 8. Burial affirms two fundamental Jewish beliefs. A. Our bodies aren't ours. They belong to God. And B. There will be a resurrection of the dead in the Messianic era.
Okay, so that brings us to the end of today's class. Are there any questions?
Yes, Rabbi, I would like to ask a question about reincarnation. So, does Judaism believe in reincarnation?
So
Yeah.
first of all, yes.
Right?
Yeah, Rambam writes it as part of the 13 principles of our faith. Yes.
Okay, and we just said that the soul and the body are still connected after death. If we believe in reincarnation, when we connect to the soul at the grave, are we connecting with someone else's soul that is in another body? Or what's the link between the new body and the old body?
So let me just understand your question. So let's say you're saying if the body is a body that was here 100 years ago, let's just say, right?
Yeah.
And now you are praying at that body, but really the soul has moved on into another body. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. So the soul is connected to all the bodies that it lived in. So let's say all of us here at this class are probably here 10, 20, 30 times already. But our soul, which is in this current body, is actually connected to all the bodies of the last multiple generations, times that we were here. But when it's going to be resurrected, it's going to be resurrected in the last body that actually hosted the soul. But there's a connection. The soul still has a connection between all the bodies that it's lived in. Think of an apple. You slice an apple into 100 pieces. Each piece is still the apple. So the soul, think of it as slice. There's no such thing as slice in spiritual sense, but think of it as it's part of the soul is actually in every single body.
Thank you.
But this is deep Kabbalistic stuff. I mean, this is the foundation of our faith, how we treat bodies, and it's to do with so much of the halakha that we learn. I mean, unfortunately, I do a lot of burials. I do a lot of this stuff. And I mean, this is like part of a rabbi literally on a weekly basis. Forget about COVID, that there's so many deaths and funerals and burials. This is how we treat bodies.
So that means that every soul that is in that we have in our generation is one piece of an ancient soul, right?
Yes,
we're all pieces of old souls.
Yes, 100%. By the way, the Lubavitcher Rebbe told us our generation is the last generation of exile and the first generation of redemption, which means that we will live forever. We will greet Mashiach. When Mashiach comes, nobody's going to die anymore. So, God willing, that should happen soon.
Amen. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, great. If anybody has any other questions, feel free to call me, text me, WhatsApp me. I'm on Signal now and Telegram. So.
Oh, thank you so much, Rabbi.
All right, thank you guys. Laila
Thank
Tov.
you,
Good
Rabbi.
night.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
See you all next week.
Yes.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay,
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.